The garbage girl was despised by everyone, and the millionaire saw the small ring hanging on the chain around her neck. It was the same one he had made with his daughter's name before she disappeared 25 years ago. The morning sun cast long shadows across Fifth Avenue, turning the pristine sidewalks of Upper East Side into ribbons of gold and gray. While most of Manhattan still slept, Natalie Cooper was already 3 hours into her daily hunt for survival. Her weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency through the recycling bins outside the Meridian Tower, sorting aluminum cans from plastic bottles. Each piece meant a few cents. Each dollar meant another day of staying alive. The residents of this gleaming district threw away more in a single morning than most people earned in a week. But Natalie had learned not to dwell on the irony. "Hey, get away from there!" The sharp voice cut through the morning air like a blade. Natalie didn't need to look up to know she'd been spotted by another doorman who saw her as nothing more than urban blight. She'd heard that tone 1,000 times before. The disgust, the contempt, the complete dismissal of her humanity. "I'm not hurting anyone," she said quietly, continuing to work. Experience had taught her that moving slowly and speaking softly sometimes bought her a few more precious minutes. The doorman, a stocky man with arms crossed tight against his chest, stepped closer. His uniform was perfectly pressed, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. "You're hurting the property values just by being here. Move along before I call the cops." Natalie straightened up, her joints protesting after hours of bending and lifting. At 29, her body already carried the weight of too many nights sleeping on concrete, too many meals skipped, too many winters survived with nothing but hope and stubbornness. "I'll be done in a minute," she said, reaching for the last few bottles, but the doorman was already pulling out his phone. "That's it. I'm calling security." As he dialed, Natalie's fingers unconsciously moved to the small gold chain around her neck, hidden beneath the layers of worn clothing. The delicate ring that hung from it was her most precious possession, the only thing that had been with her since childhood. She'd worn it so long that it had become part of her, a tangible reminder that she had once belonged somewhere, to someone. The security guards arrived within minutes. 2 men in dark suits who looked like they'd stepped out of a corporate handbook. They approached with the casual authority of people who'd never questioned their right to remove inconvenient human beings from sight. "Ma'am, you need to leave the premises immediately," the taller one said, his voice carrying the practiced politeness that barely concealed his impatience. "I'm on a public sidewalk," Natalie replied. Though she was already gathering her meager collection of recyclables, she'd learned that fighting rarely ended well for someone in her position. "The sidewalk may be public, but loitering is illegal. You're making our tenants uncomfortable." The shorter guard stepped forward, his hand resting on the radio clipped to his belt. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way, your choice." Natalie felt the familiar burn of humiliation in her chest. 25 years of this. 25 years of being treated like garbage, of being invisible until she became inconvenient. She'd grown up in the St. Agnes orphanage believing she was unwanted, unclaimed, forgotten. The streets had only reinforced that lesson. "I'm leaving," she said, shouldering her worn backpack. But as she turned to go, the shorter guard grabbed her arm. "Not so fast. Empty your pockets first." "What?" Natalie jerked away, her survival instincts flaring. "I didn't take anything." "That's what they all say. Come on, let's see what you've got." The taller guard moved to block her path while his partner reached for her backpack. Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been through this before. The accusations, the rough handling, the assumption that poverty equaled criminality. "Please," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "I just need the bottles. I'm not causing trouble." "Trouble is what you are," the shorter guard said, yanking her backpack away. "Existing where you don't belong." The backpack hit the pavement, spilling its contents across the sidewalk. Natalie watched her life scatter. A few crumpled bills, a worn paperback book, a small photo of the orphanage, the energy bars she'd been saving for dinner. The guards laughed as she scrambled to collect her belongings, the sound cutting through her like broken glass. Meanwhile, 12 blocks away, Robert Ellington stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor of the Ellington building, staring out at the city that had made him rich and destroyed his soul. The view was spectacular. Central Park stretching green and endless. The Hudson River gleaming in the distance. But he saw none of it. His mind was trapped in the past, in the afternoon 25 years ago, when his world had ended. His daughter's face smiled at him from the silver frame on his desk. Leah, at 4 years old, gap-toothed and giggling, wearing the tiny gold ring he'd had made for her birthday. Leah, eternal love. Daddy, he'd had engraved on the delicate band, a promise that their bond would last forever. The promise had been broken 3 days later. Robert closed his eyes and let the familiar guilt wash over him. He'd been in Chicago on business when it happened, closing a deal that seemed so important at the time. He'd left Leah with Brenda, the housekeeper who'd been with their family since before the divorce. Brenda had been like a second mother to Leah, devoted and caring, someone he'd trusted completely. When he'd returned from Chicago, both Leah and Brenda were gone. The police had found what looked like a suicide note in Leah's handwriting, a 4-year-old's scrawled confession that she'd run away because Daddy didn't love her anymore. The note had been found along with evidence that Brenda had stolen $500,000 from the family's safe before disappearing. 25 years of searching, 25 years of private investigators, psychics, false leads, and crushing disappointment. 25 years of wondering if his little girl was alive or dead, safe or suffering, remembering him or lost in some nightmare he couldn't reach. The Ellington Foundation had helped reunite hundreds of families with their missing children, but Robert's own daughter remained a ghost. He'd never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, never stopped believing that somewhere out there, Leah was waiting for him to find her. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Ellington, the Morrison meeting has been moved to 2 o'clock. "Fine," Robert said, though he wasn't really listening. His eyes were fixed on Leah's photograph, on the joy in her face that he'd failed to protect. He straightened his tie and checked his watch. Time for another day of pretending that anything mattered more than the empty space where his daughter should have been. Time for another day of carrying the weight of his greatest failure. Back on Fifth Avenue, Natalie had managed to collect most of her scattered belongings when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see an older man in an expensive suit walking toward them, his expression dark with anger. "What the hell is going on here?" the man demanded, his voice carrying the kind of authority that made the security guards immediately step back. The taller guard cleared his throat. "Just removing a vagrant from the property." "Mr. Ellington, standard procedure. Robert Ellington." Natalie had heard the name before. One of the city's most powerful developers, owner of half the buildings in Manhattan. She braced herself for another lecture about property values and public nuisances. But when Robert's eyes met hers, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual disgust or dismissal, she saw something else. A flicker of recognition, of shared pain, of understanding what it meant to be broken by the world. "She's not on your property," Robert said quietly. "She's on a public sidewalk collecting recyclables. What law is she breaking?" The guards exchanged glances. "Sir, with respect, having people like her hanging around affects the building's image." "People like her," Robert's voice was dangerously quiet. "You mean human beings who are trying to survive?" Natalie watched in amazement as the most powerful man in Manhattan defended her right to exist. She'd never had anyone stand up for her before. Never had anyone see her as more than an inconvenience to be removed. "Thank you," she said softly, getting to her feet. When she stood up, the morning sun caught the gold chain around her neck, making the small ring gleam like a beacon. Robert's eyes followed the light. And when he saw what hung from the chain, the world stopped. The ring was tiny, delicate, clearly made for a child, and even from several feet away, he could see the engraving that had haunted his dreams for 25 years. "Leah, eternal love, Daddy." Robert Ellington felt the blood drain from his face as he stared at the small gold ring hanging from Natalie's neck. The world around him seemed to tilt on its axis, the sounds of Manhattan traffic fading to a distant hum. 25 years of searching, 25 years of hope and despair. And here, on a sidewalk outside one of his own buildings, was the one piece of evidence that could change everything. "Sir, are you all right?" one of the security guards asked, but Robert barely heard him. His legs felt unsteady as he took a step closer to Natalie, his eyes fixed on the ring that had once symbolized a father's eternal love for his 4-year-old daughter. The engraving was still visible, worn but unmistakable. "Leah, eternal love, Daddy." Natalie noticed his stare and instinctively pulled her jacket closed, hiding the chain. She'd learned to be suspicious of attention from wealthy men. Nothing good ever came from being noticed by people who lived in towers while she slept in doorways. "Where did you get that?" Robert's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Get what?" Natalie took a step back, her hand moving protectively to her throat. "The ring. The ring on your necklace." Robert's businessman composure was cracking, revealing the desperate father underneath. "Please, I need to know where you got it." The security guards exchanged confused glances. This wasn't going according to their usual script. The homeless woman was supposed to be gone by now, and their boss was supposed to be back in his office making money. Natalie's eyes darted between Robert and the guards, calculating her escape routes. She'd been in situations like this before. Cornered, questioned, accused of stealing something she'd never taken. The ring had been with her for as long as she could remember. A gift from one of the few kind nurses at St. Agnes, who'd told her it must be important, since it was the only thing she'd had when she arrived at the orphanage as a small child. "I didn't steal it," she said defensively. "It's mine. I've had it since I was little." Robert's heart hammered against his ribs. The woman standing before him was the right age, 29, which would make her 4 when Leah disappeared. But she looked nothing like the cherubic little girl in his memories. This woman was hardened by the streets, thin from too many missed meals, her dark hair tangled and unkempt. Her clothes were layered and worn, her face marked by the kind of weariness that came from years of fighting just to survive. But those eyes, even surrounded by the premature lines of hard living, those eyes held something familiar, something that made his chest tighten with a hope he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. "What's your name?" he asked gently, trying to keep his voice steady. "Why do you care?" Natalie shot back, but there was more fear than defiance in her tone. "Please, just tell me your name." She hesitated, then lifted her chin with the stubborn pride of someone who'd learned that dignity was sometimes the only thing they couldn't take from you. "Natalie Cooper." The name hit Robert like a physical blow. Not Leah, not his daughter's name, but that didn't necessarily mean anything. Kidnapped children were often given new identities, new lives, new families that erased their past completely. "How long have you had the ring?" he pressed. "Look, mister, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I'm not interested." Natalie shouldered her backpack, ready to disappear into the city the way she'd learned to do whenever trouble found her. "Thanks for helping with these guys, but I need to go." "Wait!" Robert's voice cracked with desperation. "Please, can I see it just for a second?" Something in his tone stopped her. It wasn't the voice of a predator or a con artist. It was the voice of someone in pain, someone who'd lost something precious and never stopped looking for it. Against her better judgment, Natalie found herself hesitating. The security guards were getting restless. "Mr. Ellington, should we call the police?" the taller one asked. "No," Robert said quickly. "No police." He took a careful step toward Natalie, his hands raised peacefully. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to see the ring. It might be something that belonged to my family." Natalie's laugh was bitter. "Right, because obviously someone like me couldn't possibly own anything valuable on my own. That's not what I meant." Robert's voice was gentle now, almost pleading. "I had a daughter. She disappeared 25 years ago. She was wearing a ring exactly like yours when she vanished." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they wanted to cross. Natalie felt something shift in her chest, a strange sensation she couldn't name. She'd spent her entire life wondering about her past, about the mysterious circumstances that had brought her to St. Agnes as a small child with no memory of her life before. "Lots of kids have rings," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Not like this one." Robert pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos until he found the one he was looking for. A close-up of Leah wearing the ring. Her tiny hand stretched out toward the camera so the engraving was clearly visible. He held the phone out to Natalie with trembling fingers. Natalie stared at the image, her breath catching in her throat. The ring in the photo was identical to hers. The same delicate gold band, the same careful engraving, even the same small scratch near the letters that she'd always wondered about. "This was taken 3 days before she disappeared," Robert said quietly. "Her name was Leah Ellington. She was 4 years old, and she was the light of my life." The morning sun seemed too bright suddenly, the sounds of the city too loud. Natalie felt dizzy, as if the solid ground beneath her feet had turned to quicksand. She'd imagined this moment countless times over the years. The moment when someone would appear with answers about her past, about why she'd been abandoned, about who she really was. But she'd never imagined it would happen like this. On a sidewalk surrounded by security guards who wanted her gone. "I don't remember being 4, she said faintly. "I don't remember anything before the orphanage." Robert's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for 25 years. "Do you remember anything at all? A house, maybe, or a man who called you princess?" The word hit her like lightning. Princess. Somewhere in the deepest corners of her mind, an echo stirred. A warm voice calling her princess. Strong arms lifting her up. The feeling of being safe and loved and wanted. She'd always dismissed those fragments as wishful thinking. Dreams her mind had created to fill the empty spaces where memories should have been. She started, then stopped. The security guards were still watching. Curious now, instead of hostile. A small crowd of morning commuters had begun to gather, drawn by the drama unfolding on their familiar street. Robert noticed the audience too, and realized how this must look. A billionaire businessman interrogating a homeless woman about jewelry on a public sidewalk. But he couldn't stop now, not when he was so close to answers he'd been seeking for half his lifetime. "Would you?" He swallowed hard, barely believing he was about to ask this. "Would you come with me? Somewhere private where we can talk?" Every survival instinct Natalie had screamed danger. Never go anywhere alone with a strange man, especially not a powerful one who could make you disappear without a trace. But something deeper than instinct was stirring in her chest. A longing she'd carried for 29 years. A desperate need to finally understand who she was and where she'd come from. "Why should I trust you?" she asked. Robert looked at her, really looked at her, and saw past the layers of dirt and worn clothing to the person underneath. In her wary green eyes, he caught a glimpse of the little girl who used to climb into his lap for bedtime stories, who'd called him daddy in a voice like music. "Because," he said softly, "I think you might be the daughter I've been looking for my entire adult life. And if you are, then I've already failed you once. I won't fail you again." The ring seemed to grow heavier around Natalie's neck. 25 years of questions suddenly demanding answers. She looked at Robert Ellington, this stranger who might be her father, and made the decision that would change both their lives forever. "1 hour," she said, "somewhere public, and I keep the ring." Robert nodded, barely trusting himself to speak. After 25 years of searching, his daughter might finally be coming home. The DNA lab on East 73rd Street was sterile and clinical. All white walls and fluorescent lighting. Natalie sat rigidly in the chair, watching the technician prepare the cheek swab with practiced efficiency. 2 days had passed since her encounter with Robert Ellington. 2 days of sleeping fitfully in the shelter, while her mind churned with possibilities she'd never dared to consider. "This won't hurt," the technician said kindly, extending the cotton swab. "Just a quick scrape inside your cheek." Natalie opened her mouth, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Beside her, Robert had already completed his test. The evidence of their potential connection now sealed in sterile tubes that would be rushed to the lab's fastest processing unit. Money, she was learning, could make anything happen quickly, even miracles. "Results will be ready in 6 hours, the technician explained, labeling the samples with careful precision. "We'll call as soon as we have them." 6 hours. 6 hours to learn whether her entire understanding of herself was wrong. Whether the emptiness she'd carried her whole life had been manufactured by someone else's cruelty. They walked out of the lab in silence, the weight of waiting settling between them like a living thing. Robert had insisted on paying for a hotel room where Natalie could shower and rest while they waited. She'd accepted reluctantly, unused to kindness that came without strings attached. "I need to tell you something," Robert said as they stood on the sidewalk outside the lab. "About the day Leah disappeared." Natalie pulled her jacket tighter around herself. Even in the afternoon warmth, she felt cold. "What happened?" Robert's face aged 10 years in an instant. "I was in Chicago, a business deal that seemed so important at the time. I'd left Leah with our housekeeper, Brenda Whitaker. She'd been with us for 3 years, ever since the divorce. Leah adored her." He paused, watching a group of school children walk by with their teacher, their laughter a painful reminder of what he'd lost. "When I came home, they were both gone. Leah and Brenda, At first, I thought maybe Brenda had taken her to the park or for ice cream, but then I found the note. What note? In Leah's bedroom, written in her handwriting. It said she was running away because Daddy didn't love her anymore. Robert's voice cracked. A 4-year-old, writing about running away. The police found evidence that Brenda had stolen $500,000 from our family safe. They assumed she'd panicked, maybe taken Leah with her initially. Then, he couldn't finish the sentence. Natalie felt something cold settle in her stomach. They never found either of them. Never. It was like they vanished into thin air. The police theorized that Brenda had fled to Canada with her boyfriend. There were records of her dating someone there. As for Leah, Robert swallowed hard. They thought Brenda might have abandoned her somewhere. Or worse. The afternoon sun felt harsh on Natalie's face. She'd always wondered why she had no memories before the age of 4. Why the earliest thing she could recall was waking up in a white room at St. Agnes, with a kind nurse telling her she was safe now. The other children at the orphanage had stories about their lives before. Families who'd died, parents who couldn't care for them, relatives who'd brought them there. But Natalie's past had been a complete blank, as if she'd materialized out of nothing. The orphanage, she said suddenly. St. Agnes, did you ever check there? Robert nodded grimly. We checked everywhere within a 500-mile radius. Every hospital, every police station, every children's home. St. Agnes was on the list, but their records showed no admissions matching Leah's description during that time period. But I was there, Natalie said, confusion creeping into her voice. I arrived when I was 4. The nurse told me I'd been found alone, that there were no records of my family. Robert's phone buzzed with a text message. His face went pale as he read it. What is it? My private investigator. He's been working the case for 15 years. He says he has new information about Brenda Whitaker. Robert's hands shook as he typed a response. He wants to meet us at my office now. The Ellington building's executive floor was a testament to success. Mahogany paneling, original artwork, windows that offered a view of the entire city. But Robert's office felt more like a shrine to loss. Photographs of Leah at various ages covered every surface, along with age progression photos showing what she might look like now. Natalie stared at the images, searching for some trace of recognition. The little girl in the photos had the same green eyes, the same stubborn chin, but she looked so different from the memories Natalie had of herself as a child. This Leah had been cherished, pampered, loved. The child Natalie remembered from her earliest days at St. Agnes had been hollow-eyed and silent, withdrawn from the world. Marcus Chen, Robert's private investigator, was a small, intense man with the kind of focus that came from years of pursuing truth through lies. He spread a collection of documents across Robert's conference table like a dealer shuffling cards. 25 years, he said without preamble. 25 years, and I finally found her. Brenda. Robert's voice was barely a whisper. She's been living in Phoenix under the name Paula Kimball. Has been for 20 years. Runs a chain of daycare centers. If you can believe the irony, Marcus pulled out a photograph. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes, surrounded by smiling children. Model citizen, pillar of the community. Nobody would ever suspect she's been living a lie for 2.5 decades. Natalie studied the photo. Searching for some flicker of recognition, the woman looked vaguely familiar, but in the way that all middle-aged women with soft features looked familiar. How did you find her? Robert asked. Financial records? She's been careful, but not perfect. Small inconsistencies over the years. A social security number that didn't quite match up. Tax records that started too late. I've been building a case piece by piece. Marcus pulled out another document. But here's the interesting part. Guess where Paula Kimball was living before she moved to Phoenix? Robert waited. Albany, right next to a little town called Millbrook, where St. Agnes Orphanage used to be. The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Natalie felt the world tilt again, just as it had on the sidewalk 2 days ago. Used to be, she asked. The orphanage closed down 15 years ago, sold the property to developers, but I managed to track down some of the old staff. Marcus turned to Natalie. Sister Margaret Donnelly. She was the intake coordinator from 1995 to 2010. She remembers you. Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. What did she say? that you arrived in the middle of the night in July 1999. A woman dropped you off, said she'd found you wandering alone on a highway. No identification, no family contacts. You were maybe 4 years old, and you wouldn't speak for the first 6 months you were there. The fragments of memory that had been stirring in Natalie's mind suddenly clicked into sharper focus. She remembered the silence, the way words had felt impossible, as if her voice had been stolen along with everything else. She remembered the nightmares that had plagued her for years, dreams of being in a car with someone who smelled like flowers and spoke in soothing tones that masked something terrible underneath. "The woman who brought me," Natalie said slowly. "Did Sister Margaret describe her?" Marcus nodded. Middle-aged, brown hair, very emotional, said she was devastated about finding you alone, that she'd searched for hours trying to find your family before bringing you to the orphanage. She gave a false name and address, paid the intake fee in cash, and disappeared. Robert stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. The city spread out below him, millions of people living their lives, but all he could think about was the 25 years his daughter had been lost among them. "She had it all planned," he said, his voice tight with controlled rage. "Brenda took Leah, drove her 300 miles away, and dumped her at an orphanage where she knew we'd never think to look thoroughly. She created a whole new identity for herself and disappeared." "But why?" Natalie asked. "Why would she do that to a child?" Marcus and Robert exchanged glances. There was more to the story, and Natalie could sense it in the tension that filled the room. "We're still piecing that together," Marcus said carefully. "But based on what I've uncovered about Brenda's background, her employment history, her personal relationships," he paused, "I think she was obsessed with your father." "Dangerously obsessed." Robert's phone rang, cutting through the heavy atmosphere. He glanced at the caller ID and his face went white. "It's the lab," he said, his voice barely audible. The three of them stared at the phone as it rang again, the sound sharp and insistent. This was the moment that would change everything. The moment when Natalie would either become Leah Ellington, lost daughter found, or remain Natalie Cooper, homeless woman with a mysterious past. Robert answered on the fourth ring, his hand trembling as he lifted the phone to his ear. "Mr. Ellington, we have your results." The DNA results lay on Robert's desk like a verdict from the universe itself. 99,097% probability of paternal relationship. The numbers that confirmed what his heart had known the moment he saw the ring, but his mind had been afraid to believe. Natalie stared at the report, the scientific proof of her identity swimming before her eyes. After 29 years of being nobody, of having no past and no family, she was suddenly somebody's daughter. Robert Ellington's daughter. The realization was overwhelming, like trying to swallow the ocean. "Leah," Robert whispered, and the name hung in the air between them like a prayer finally answered. But Natalie shook her head. "I'm not her anymore, that little girl. She died the day Brenda took her. I'm Natalie now. I've been Natalie for 25 years. The pain in Robert's eyes was almost unbearable to witness. Marcus Chen cleared his throat diplomatically, giving them a moment to process the magnitude of the revelation before continuing with his investigation. "Now that we know for certain," Marcus said gently, "we need to focus on Brenda Whitaker, or Paula Kimball, as she's been calling herself. The Phoenix Police Department is already moving on the arrest warrant, but there's something else you both need to know." He pulled out a thick file folder, worn from years of investigation. "I've been digging into Brenda's background, trying to understand her motivations. What I found," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "it's disturbing." Robert pulled his chair closer to the conference table, his businessman's composure reasserting itself. He'd spent 25 years preparing for this moment, and now he needed answers more than he needed to process his emotions. "Tell me everything," he said. Marcus opened the file, revealing photographs, employment records, and psychiatric evaluations dating back decades. "Brenda Whitaker was 33 when she came to work for your family. Before that, she'd had a series of jobs as a housekeeper and nanny for wealthy families across New York and Connecticut." He spread out employment records across the table. "Here's the pattern. She'd work for a family for 2 to 3 years, always with single fathers or recently divorced men. In every case, her employment ended abruptly with accusations of inappropriate behavior." "What kind of inappropriate behavior?" Natalie asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Overstepping boundaries, inserting herself into family decisions, making romantic overtures toward her employers. Marcus pulled out a police report from 1994. The Hartwell family in Greenwich. Brenda was fired when Mrs. Hartwell caught her going through Mr. Hartwell's personal belongings and found love letters Brenda had written to him. Letters he'd never seen. Robert's jaw tightened. Why didn't this come up in her background check? Because she was smart about it. She never stayed long enough for formal complaints to be filed. She'd leave voluntarily when things got uncomfortable, move to a new area. Sometimes use slightly different versions of her name. Marcus flipped to another page. But I found something else. Medical records from Bellevue Hospital, 1992. The psychiatric evaluation made for chilling reading. Brenda had been admitted after what the report termed a psychotic break, involving her obsession with a married man who'd rejected her advances. The diagnosis was clear. Erotomania, a delusion that someone was in love with her despite evidence to the contrary, combined with narcissistic personality disorder. She was released after 6 months, Marcus continued. Supposedly cured, but according to her therapist's notes, she showed no real improvement. She just got better at hiding her delusions. Natalie felt sick. The woman who'd kidnapped her, who'd destroyed her childhood and Robert's life, had been a predator, who'd specifically targeted their family. She planned this from the beginning, didn't she? I believe so, Marcus said. Look at the timeline. She applied for the job with your family just 3 months after your parents' divorce was finalized. She specifically sought out a position with a recently divorced wealthy man who had a young daughter. Robert stood up abruptly, pacing to the window again. The revelation that Brenda's employment hadn't been a coincidence, that she deliberately infiltrated their lives, made everything feel even more violating. She played the perfect employee for 3 years, he said, his voice hollow. Devoted to Leah, loyal to the family. I trusted her completely. That was the plan, Marcus replied. According to her previous employers, she was always exemplary at first, patient, caring, indispensable. It wasn't until later that the obsessive behavior would surface. He pulled out copies of letters, dozens of them, written in Brenda's careful handwriting but never sent. Marcus had found them hidden in a storage unit she'd rented under a false name in Albany. She wrote to you constantly, Marcus told Robert. Love letters, plans for your future together, fantasies about raising Leah as her own daughter. In her mind, you were already a couple. Your ex-wife was just an obstacle that had been conveniently removed by the divorce. Robert picked up one of the letters, his hands shaking as he read Brenda's neat script. Darling Robert, Leah called me Mama today when she was half asleep. It felt so natural. So right. Soon we won't have to pretend anymore. Soon we can be the family we were meant to be. She thought you were going to marry her, Natalie said, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. When it became clear that wasn't going to happen, Marcus continued. Her delusions turned violent. The letters from 1999, right before the kidnapping, show a dramatic shift in tone. He handed Robert another letter, this one filled with rage and betrayal. You don't see me, do you? After everything I've done for you, for your precious daughter, you look right through me like I'm nothing. But I'll make you see me. Robert, I'll make you realize what you've lost when it's too late. The room fell silent as the full scope of Brenda's calculated revenge became clear. She hadn't kidnapped Leah for money or out of some misguided protective instinct. She'd done it to punish Robert for not loving her, to destroy his happiness as completely as he destroyed hers by failing to recognize her devotion. The note, Robert said suddenly. The suicide note supposedly written by Leah. Brenda wrote it. Marcus nodded. Handwriting analysis confirms it. She forced a 4-year-old to copy letters and words, then assembled them into a message designed to maximize your guilt and pain. Natalie closed her eyes, trying to push away the memory that was surfacing, sitting at a table, crying, while a woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice told her to write letters. For a game, the woman had said. Just copy these letters for our special game. She kept me for 3 days, Natalie said suddenly, the memory crystallizing with horrible clarity. Before she took me to the orphanage, I remember now, she had a house, and she made me call her Mama. The words came tumbling out. Memories that had been buried for 25 years, finally breaking free. The house with flowered wallpaper, The woman who smelled like vanilla and spoke in soothing tones while her eyes held something cold and frightening. The way she'd dressed Natalie in new clothes and brushed her hair and told her they were going to play a wonderful game. She was living out her fantasy, Marcus said grimly. 3 days of playing house with your daughter before reality set in, and she realized she couldn't keep her. So she threw me away, Natalie said, her voice flat, like garbage. She abandoned you where she knew you'd be found and cared for, but where Robert would never think to look thoroughly, Marcus corrected. It was calculated cruelty. She wanted you alive, but lost to him forever. Robert's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and saw it was Detective Ray Morrison from the Phoenix Police Department. Mr. Ellington, we've got her. Paula Kimball, aka Brenda Whitaker, is in custody. She didn't resist arrest, but... The detective paused. Sir, you need to know something. When we arrested her, she was wearing a locket. Inside was a photo of a little girl. We think it might be your daughter. Robert's legs nearly gave out. Even after 25 years, even after building a new life and identity, Brenda had kept a piece of his stolen child with her. There's something else, Detective Morrison continued. She's asking to speak with you. Says she has things to tell you about your daughter that you need to hear. The silence in the office was deafening. After 25 years of questions, they were about to get answers. But as Natalie looked at her father, a man she was still learning to recognize, she wondered if some truths were too terrible to bear. Marcus was already packing up his files. I'll arrange for transport to Phoenix. We can be there tomorrow morning. No, Natalie said suddenly. Both men looked at her in surprise. I mean, you can go, but I'm not ready to face her, not yet. Robert nodded slowly, understanding. His daughter had already survived 25 years of Brenda's cruelty. She shouldn't have to confront her tormentor until she was ready. I'll go alone, he said. It's time I heard what she has to say, but none of them could have predicted what Brenda Whitaker would reveal. When she finally broke her silence, the Ritz-Carlton suite felt like a palace to Natalie, all marble and gold fixtures, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed, still wearing the same clothes she'd lived in on the streets, afraid to touch anything that looked too expensive. Robert had insisted on the hotel while they figured out what came next, but luxury felt foreign against her skin. Like wearing someone else's life, she stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to see Leah Ellington in the hollow-cheeked woman looking back at her. The hot shower had washed away years of street grime, revealing skin that was paler than she remembered, arms marked with small scars from 25 years of survival. Her dark hair, clean for the first time in months, hung limp around her shoulders. Leah Ellington would have had manicures and facials, personal trainers and stylists. She would have attended private schools and charity galas, learned to ride horses and speak French. Instead, Natalie Cooper had learned to pick locks and avoid police sweeps, to sleep light and trust no one, to make a dollar stretch for 3 days and to disappear into shadows when danger approached. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Natalie, may I come in? Robert's voice was careful, respectful of boundaries she was still learning to set. 3 days since the DNA results, and they were both walking on eggshells, trying to figure out how to be father and daughter when they were essentially strangers. It's your money paying for the room, she said, opening the door. Robert winced at the reminder of the gulf between them. He'd changed out of his business suit into khakis and a polo shirt, trying to look less intimidating, but his discomfort with the casual clothes only emphasized how different their worlds were. I brought some things, he said, gesturing to the shopping bags in his hands. Clothes, toiletries. I wasn't sure what size. He trailed off, realizing how presumptuous it sounded. Natalie looked at the designer bags with suspicion. I didn't ask for charity. It's not charity. You're my daughter. The word still sounded strange coming from his mouth, like a foreign language he was trying to learn. I want to take care of you. I've been taking care of myself just fine for 29 years. The defiance in her voice reminded him painfully of 4-year-old Leah, who'd always been stubborn and independent. But this wasn't the charming willfulness of a beloved child. This was the hard-won self-reliance of someone who'd learned that depending on others meant disappointment and betrayal. I know you have, he said quietly, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there to protect you, to provide for you. I'm sorry you had to become so strong because I failed to keep you safe. The words hit Natalie like a physical blow. She'd imagined this conversation 1,000 times over the years. What she'd say to the parents who'd abandoned her. How she'd make them understand the pain of being unwanted. But Robert's grief was so raw, his guilt so genuine, that her prepared anger felt suddenly inadequate. You didn't fail, she found herself saying. You were betrayed by someone you trusted. That's not the same thing. Robert's eyes filled with tears he'd been holding back for days. I should have known. There must have been signs, warning signals I missed because I was too focused on work, on rebuilding my life after the divorce. Natalie sat down on the couch, putting distance between them while she processed the strange experience of comforting the father she'd never known she had. What was she like? The real Leah before. Robert's face lit up with a mixture of joy and sorrow. Fearless. You were absolutely fearless. You'd climb anything, explore everything, ask a million questions about how the world worked. He sat down across from her, careful to maintain space. You had this laugh that could fill a whole room. And you were so smart. You'd learned to read before you turned 4. The fragments didn't match Natalie's sense of herself. The woman she'd become was cautious, suspicious, someone who spoke only when necessary and trusted no one completely. The fearless, laughing child Robert described felt like a character from someone else's story. Do you remember anything? Robert asked gently. About before? Natalie closed her eyes, trying to reach past the walls her mind had built to protect itself. Pieces, a man's voice reading stories, the smell of pancakes on Sunday morning, a big dog that liked to steal food from my plate. She opened her eyes. But it's like remembering a movie I saw once, not my own life. We had a golden retriever named Buster, Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. He died 2 years after you disappeared. I think he spent those 2 years waiting for you to come home. The detail was so specific, so perfectly matched to her fragmented memory, that it broke something loose in Natalie's chest. For the first time since learning the truth, she allowed herself to believe that this wasn't some elaborate con, that this man really was her father. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, the words coming out smaller than she'd intended. Do what? Be somebody's daughter? Have a family? I've been alone so long. I don't remember how to be anything else. Robert leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly together. I don't know how to do it either. Be a father to a grown woman I don't know, who survived things I can't even imagine. We're both learning. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 25 lost years settling between them. Outside the windows, Manhattan pulsed with its eternal energy, millions of people living their lives. But inside the suite, time felt suspended. Tell me about the streets, Robert said suddenly. Natalie looked at him in surprise. What? I want to understand. What your life was like? How you survived? I need to know what happened to my daughter while I was looking for her. The request was unexpected, and Natalie felt herself tensing defensively. Most people didn't really want to know about homelessness. They wanted to feel better about themselves by throwing money at the problem, not confront the daily reality of it. You sure you want to hear this? It's not pretty. I need to hear it. So Natalie told him about the first night on the streets at 18, kicked out of St. Agnes with nowhere to go and no skills for the real world, about learning to sleep with one eye open, to hoard food when she found it, to recognize the difference between predators and people who just wanted to help, about the brutal winters when staying warm meant the difference between life and death, and the blazing summers when finding shade and water became a full-time job. She told him about the small kindnesses that had kept her human, the deli owner who sometimes left day-old sandwiches where she could find them, the librarian who let her stay inside during the worst weather, the other homeless people who'd shared their knowledge and occasionally their resources. And she told him about the cruelties, both casual and deliberate, the way people looked through her as if she didn't exist, the teenagers who threw garbage at her for entertainment, the police officers who moved her along from one spot to another in an endless cycle of displacement, the constant fear of violence, of theft, of disappearing completely without anyone noticing or caring. Robert listened without interrupting, his face growing paler with each detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. I'm going to kill her, he said finally, his voice flat and matter-of-fact. No, you're not. She stole 25 years from both of us. She turned you into—" He gestured helplessly at the woman sitting across from him, strong and scarred and nothing like the cherished daughter he'd lost. "She turned me into a survivor," Natalie said firmly. "Someone who doesn't give up, who finds a way to keep going no matter what. Maybe that's not who Leah would have been, but it's who I am." Robert stared at her, seeing past his grief to the remarkable woman his daughter had become despite everything that had been done to her. "You're right," he said quietly. "You're absolutely right." His phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Chen. "Brenda's talking. She wants to see you tomorrow. Says she has something that belongs to Leah." Robert showed Natalie the message, watching her face carefully for her reaction. "Go," she said without hesitation. "Find out what else she stole from us." But as Robert prepared for his confrontation with the woman who'd destroyed their lives, neither he nor Natalie could have imagined that Brenda's final revelation would threaten to tear them apart all over again. The Phoenix County Jail was a fortress of concrete and razor wire. Squatting like a malignant tumor under the desert sun, Robert sat in the rental car outside the facility, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had gone white. 25 years of searching, and now he was minutes away from facing the woman who'd destroyed his life. Detective Ray Morrison met him at the entrance, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and the patient demeanor of someone who'd seen humanity at its worst and somehow retained his faith in justice. "She's been cooperative since the arrest," Morrison explained as they walked through the security checkpoints. "Almost eager to talk, which frankly makes me nervous. In my experience, people who confess this readily usually have an agenda." The interview room was small and sterile, furnished with nothing but a metal table and 3 chairs. Cameras in the corners recorded everything, their red lights blinking like mechanical eyes. Robert took his seat across from the empty chair where Brenda would sit, trying to prepare himself for a confrontation he'd imagined countless times, but never quite believed would happen. When the door opened and Brenda Whitaker walked in, Robert's first thought was how ordinary she looked. The woman who'd haunted his nightmares for 25 years was just another middle-aged lady with silver hair and laugh lines around her eyes. She wore the orange jumpsuit of a county jail inmate, but she carried herself with the confidence of someone attending a social gathering. "Hello, Robert," she said, settling into her chair with a slight smile. "You look well. Success agrees with you." Her casual tone was like a slap across the face. Robert had to resist the urge to lunge across the table and wrap his hands around her throat. Instead, he forced himself to speak calmly. "Where is she? What did you do with my daughter?" Brenda tilted her head, studying him with the patient interest of a scientist observing a specimen. "You already know where she is, don't you? I heard about the DNA test. I must say, I'm impressed you found her so quickly once you knew where to look." "I found her by accident," Robert said through gritted teeth. "She was living on the streets like an animal because of what you did to her." Something flickered in Brenda's eyes. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. "The streets. But I made sure she'd be taken care of. Agnes was supposed to find her a good family, give her the life she deserved. They tried, but without proper documentation, without any real information about her background. She aged out of the system. She's been homeless for over a decade." Brenda's composure cracked slightly. That wasn't supposed to happen. I left money with the orphanage, enough to ensure her care until she was adopted. Money that was stolen, Detective Morrison interjected. Money that belonged to Mr. Ellington's family. "Everything I did was for love," Brenda said, her voice rising. "Every sacrifice, every decision, was because I loved them both so much." Robert slammed his hand on the table, making the metal ring like a bell. "Love? You call kidnapping a 4-year-old child love? You call destroying her life and mine love?" Brenda flinched but recovered quickly. "You never saw me. Did you, Robert? 3 years I devoted myself to your family. 3 years of caring for your home, raising your daughter, being there for you through the darkest period of your life. But I was invisible to you. Just another employee, another piece of furniture. Because that's what you were," Robert said coldly. "An employee, nothing more." The words hit Brenda like physical blows. Her face contorted with rage, revealing the instability that had been hiding beneath her grandmotherly exterior. "Nothing more," she repeated, her voice shaking. "I was the one who held Leah when she had nightmares about the divorce. I was the one who made her favorite cookies, who taught her to tie her shoes, who listened to her practice reading. I was more of a mother to her than that selfish bitch you married ever was. Don't you dare. She called me Mama, you know, Brenda continued, her eyes gleaming with a fanatic's fervor. During those 3 beautiful days when it was just the 2 of us, she was so happy, Robert, so content. We played house and baked cookies, and I read her stories. She told me I was the best mama in the whole world. Robert felt sick. The image of his terrified 4-year-old daughter being manipulated by this delusional woman was almost too much to bear. You were holding her prisoner, he said. I was loving her, Brenda corrected. For 3 perfect days. We were a real family. If I could have kept her forever, I would have. But I knew you'd find us eventually. And I couldn't bear the thought of her being torn away from me again. Detective Morrison leaned forward. So you abandoned her at an orphanage instead? Brenda's face crumpled. It was the hardest thing I ever did. But I knew Agnes would find her a good family. People who would love her the way she deserved, I thought. I thought she'd be happy. Happy. Robert's voice was barely controlled fury. She spent 14 years in an orphanage, then 11 years on the streets. She doesn't remember her real name, her real family, anything about the life you stole from her. You destroyed a child's entire existence because I wouldn't marry you. Because you wouldn't see me, Brenda corrected. I gave you everything. Robert, my youth, my devotion, my love. I could have made you happy, made us all happy, but you looked right through me like I was nothing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and silver, a locket that Detective Morrison had mentioned during the arrest with trembling fingers. She opened it to reveal a photograph of 4-year-old Leah, the same image that sat on Robert's desk back in New York. I carried her with me every day for 25 years, Brenda whispered. I built my life around children because I couldn't have the one child who mattered, every little girl in my daycare centers. I pretended was her. I gave them all the love I should have been able to give to Leah. Robert stared at the locket, at his daughter's innocent face smiling up from the small frame. The sight of it in Brenda's possession felt like a final violation, the last piece of his child's identity claimed by the woman who'd taken everything else. You're sick, he said quietly. You've been sick for 25 years, and instead of getting help, you built a new life based on a lie. I'm not sick, Brenda protested. I'm in love. I've always been in love with you, with the idea of us being a family. That's not sick, that's human. Detective Morrison slid a document across the table. This is your confession, Miss Whitaker. We've already verified most of the details through our investigation. Sign it, and we can discuss a plea arrangement. Brenda picked up the pen, but didn't immediately sign. Instead, she looked at Robert with eyes that were suddenly lucid and calculating. I'll sign this, she said slowly, but I want something in return. You're in no position to make demands, Morrison said. I want to see her, Brenda continued, ignoring the detective. I want to see Leah, to tell her I'm sorry, to explain why I did what I did. Absolutely not, Robert said immediately. She's not Leah anymore. Is she? Brenda asked, tilting her head. She goes by Natalie now. I read it in the police report. Natalie Cooper, homeless for 11 years. Do you think she hates me, Robert? Do you think she blames me for the life she's had to live? Robert stood up so abruptly his chair fell backward. This interview is over. But Brenda wasn't finished. As the guards moved to escort her back to her cell, she called out one last revelation that stopped Robert cold. I know where your wife is buried, Robert. Your ex-wife. The one who was supposed to pick up Leah that weekend but never showed up. Would you like to know what really happened to her? The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Robert turned slowly, his face white with shock. What did you say? Brenda smiled, and for the first time since entering the room, she looked genuinely happy. I said I know where your ex-wife is buried. Amazing what people will confess when they think they're talking to a friend. Catherine had such interesting secrets. Robert, such dangerous secrets. Detective Morrison was already reaching for his phone, calling for backup units and crime scene technicians, but Robert was staring at Brenda with growing horror, realizing that the woman who'd destroyed his life was far more dangerous than any of them had imagined. 3 months after Brenda's arrest, the Ellington mansion felt like a museum of recovered memories. Natalie walked through rooms that should have been familiar, but weren't. touching surfaces that held the ghost of a 4-year-old girl she couldn't quite remember being. The grand staircase where Leah had supposedly slid down the banister, the kitchen where she'd helped bake cookies, the library where Robert had read her bedtime stories. "You don't have to stay here," Robert said from the doorway, watching her examine a shelf of children's books that had been preserved exactly as they were 25 years ago. "I can get you an apartment. Somewhere you'd be more comfortable." Natalie ran her fingers along the spine of Goodnight Moon, a title that stirred something deep in her memory. "No, this is good. I need to try to remember who I was before." The past 3 months had been a careful dance between them, learning to be father and daughter while respecting the walls that 25 years of separation had built. Robert had been patient, never pushing, always giving her space to process the overwhelming reality of having a family. In return, Natalie had slowly begun to let him in, sharing stories from her years on the streets, allowing him to glimpse the woman his daughter had become. She'd gained weight under his care, her hollow cheeks filling out, her eyes losing some of their perpetual wariness. The designer clothes he'd bought her still felt foreign, but she'd learned to navigate his world of charity galas and business dinners, playing the role of the lost heiress returned home, but late at night, when the mansion was quiet and the past pressed too close. She still sometimes slept on the floor beside the massive 4-poster bed in her childhood room, her body unable to trust the softness of wealth. "Dr. Chen called," Robert said, referring to the therapist who'd been helping Natalie recover her suppressed memories. "She wants to try hypnotherapy next week. She thinks it might help unlock more of your early childhood." Natalie nodded absently, still studying the bookshelf. A flash of red caught her eye, a thin volume wedged between 2 larger books. She pulled it out and found herself holding a photo album labeled Leah's First 4 Years in her father's careful handwriting. "I haven't looked at that in years," Robert said softly, moving to stand beside her. They sat together on the window seat, the album balanced between them, page by page. Natalie's lost childhood unfolded before her eyes. There she was, as a baby, tiny and red-faced in the hospital, as a toddler taking her first steps. Arms outstretched toward the camera on her 2nd birthday, covered in chocolate cake and grinning with pure joy. "You were so happy," Robert murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "Even after the divorce, even when your mother and I were fighting constantly, you were this bright light in the middle of all the darkness." Natalie studied a photograph of herself at 3. Riding on Robert's shoulders at what looked like a county fair, the little girl in the picture was laughing, her arms thrown wide as if she could embrace the whole world. It was hard to reconcile this fearless child with the careful, guarded woman she'd become. "What happened to my mother?" she asked suddenly. "You never talk about her." Robert's face darkened. "Catherine died a year after you disappeared. Car accident. Or so we thought at the time. But after what Brenda said in Phoenix, the investigation into Catherine Ellington's death had been reopened following Brenda's confession. What had originally been ruled an accident was now being examined as potential homicide. Brenda claimed to know where the body was buried, but she was using the information as leverage, demanding to see Natalie in exchange for the location. "She wants to see me," Natalie said, though it wasn't really a question. "I won't let that happen," Robert said firmly. "You don't owe her anything." But Natalie was quiet, thinking about the woman who'd stolen her childhood and destroyed her family. Part of her was curious about Brenda's motivations, about the twisted logic that had led her to believe kidnapping was an act of love. Another part of her was angry, furious at the years of hardship, the loneliness, the constant struggle for survival. "Maybe I should see her," she said finally. "Absolutely not. Dad." The word still felt strange on her tongue, but she used it deliberately, knowing how much it meant to him. "I need closure. I need to understand why she did what she did." Robert stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the gardens where 4-year-old Leah had once played. "She's dangerous, Natalie. Unstable. There's no telling what she might do if she sees you. She's in maximum security prison. What can she do?" "She can hurt you," Robert said, turning back to face her. "Maybe not physically, but emotionally. She can poison you with her delusions, make you doubt yourself, make you question everything we've built together these past 3 months." Natalie closed the photo album gently, running her hand over the cover. "Or she can give me answers. Help me understand how Leah became Natalie, how the little girl in these pictures became the woman sleeping on sidewalks. Before Robert could respond, his phone rang. Marcus Chen's name appeared on the screen, and Robert answered immediately. "What do you have for me, Marcus?" Even from across the room, Natalie could hear the urgency in the private investigator's voice. "Robert, you need to get back to the city immediately. We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" Brenda escaped during a medical transport to the hospital. She complained of chest pains, and during the transfer, she overpowered the guard and disappeared. The Phoenix Ped has issued an APB, but she's got a 12-hour head start. The phone slipped from Robert's suddenly nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. Natalie was beside him in an instant, catching his arm as he swayed. "Dad, what is it?" Robert's face had gone ashen. "Brenda escaped. She's free." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. After 3 months of slowly rebuilding their relationship, of learning to trust in safety and stability, the monster who destroyed their lives was loose again. "She'll come here," Natalie said with sudden certainty. "She'll come for me." Robert was already pulling out his backup phone, speed dialing his head of security. "Lock down the house, full security protocol, and get me Detective Morrison in Phoenix." But as he barked orders into the phone, Natalie felt something shift inside her chest. The careful peace she'd been building, the tentative trust in her new life, cracked like ice under pressure. The woman who'd survived 11 years on the streets reasserted herself, calculating escape routes and defensive positions. "We should leave," she said when Robert finished his calls. "Go somewhere she can't find us." "This house is a fortress," Robert replied. "We have security systems, guards, panic rooms. We're safer here than anywhere else." But Natalie was already moving toward the door, her survival instincts overriding everything else. "You don't understand. She's obsessed with us. With this fantasy of being a family, she won't give up, and she won't be stopped by security systems." Robert caught her arm gently. "Where are you going?" "To pack a bag, to get ready to run if we have to." She looked at him with eyes that had suddenly become hard and calculating. "She stole 25 years from us, Dad. I won't let her steal any more." As if summoned by their conversation, Robert's security chief appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Mr. Ellington, we just intercepted a call to the main house line. Someone asking for Natalie, claiming to be an old friend who wants to play a game." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. They all knew who the caller had been, and what kind of game she wanted to play. "She's coming," Natalie whispered. And for the first time since her arrest, Brenda Whitaker was no longer a caged monster from the past. She was a clear and present danger, free and hunting, with 25 years of obsession driving her toward a final confrontation that would determine whether the Ellington family would finally heal or be destroyed forever. The abandoned warehouse in Queens smelled of rust and decay, 20 years of neglect having transformed what was once a bustling distribution center into a tomb of corroded metal and broken dreams. Natalie regained consciousness slowly, her head throbbing from whatever drug Brenda had used to subdue her. The taste of copper filled her mouth, and when she tried to move, she discovered her hands were zip-tied behind her back. "You're awake," came a familiar voice from the shadows. "I was beginning to worry I'd given you too much sedative." Brenda stepped into the pale light filtering through the grimy windows, and Natalie barely recognized the woman who'd been arrested 3 months ago. Gone was the grandmotherly appearance, the soft silver hair and kind eyes. This Brenda was gaunt and wild-looking, her hair stringy and unwashed, her clothes stained from days of living rough, but it was her eyes that were most changed. They burned with a fanatic's fervor that made Natalie's blood run cold. "Hello, sweetheart," Brenda said, kneeling down beside the chair where Natalie was bound. "You're even more beautiful than I imagined you'd become, though I have to say, I preferred you when you were little. You were so much more manageable then." Natalie forced herself to stay calm, drawing on years of street survival to assess her situation. They were alone in what appeared to be a large storage space with multiple exits blocked by debris. Her phone was gone, along with the panic button Robert had insisted she carry. The zip ties were tight, but not impossible to work free from, given enough time. "How did you find me?" she asked, buying time while she tested her bonds. Brenda smiled, the expression grotesque on her haggard face. "Oh, darling, I never lost track of you, even in prison. I had people watching, keeping me informed. Did you really think your father's security team could keep me away from my own daughter? I'm not your daughter, aren't you? Brenda's voice took on the sing-song quality of someone addressing a small child. Who raised you during the most important years of your life? Who taught you to tie your shoes? Who kissed your scraped knees? Who tucked you in at night? You kidnapped me. You stole me from my real family. Brenda's face darkened. Your real family, Robert, who was too busy making money to pay attention to you. Catherine, who was planning to take you away from him permanently. She laughed bitterly. Did he tell you about that? About your mother's little plan? Natalie felt something cold settle in her stomach. What plan? She was going to disappear with you, Brenda said, settling herself on a broken crate facing Natalie. Take you somewhere Robert would never find you. She'd been planning it for months, setting up new identities, moving money into offshore accounts. She was going to steal you away from him just as surely as I did. You're lying. Am I? Why do you think she never came to pick you up that weekend? She was supposed to have you for the whole week, remember? But she never showed up because she was too busy finalizing her escape plan. Brenda's eyes gleamed with malicious satisfaction. I saved Robert from that betrayal, even if he was too blind to see it. Natalie's mind raced, trying to process this new information. She remembered Robert mentioning that Catherine had died in a car accident a year after the kidnapping, but he'd always been vague about the details. What did you do to her? Natalie asked quietly. I confronted her, Brenda said simply. Told her I knew about her plan, that I wouldn't let her destroy Robert's life any more than she already had. She laughed at me, called me a pathetic old maid who was deluding herself about Robert's feelings. Brenda stood up and began pacing, her agitation growing as she relived the memory. She said Robert would never love someone like me, that I was nothing but hired help. She was so cruel, so dismissive, just like everyone else who looked right through me as if I didn't exist. So you killed her. I defended Robert's honor, Brenda corrected. I protected him from a woman who would have destroyed him, just like I protected you from a mother who saw you as nothing but a weapon to use against your father. The casual way she spoke about murder made Natalie's skin crawl. This wasn't the delusional but ultimately harmless woman she'd imagined. This was someone who'd killed to protect her fantasy, and would kill again to preserve it. The 3 days, Natalie said, remembering fragments that had surfaced during therapy. After you took me, what really happened? Brenda's face lit up with genuine joy. The transformation so sudden and complete that it was like watching a switch flip. Oh, sweetheart, those were the most perfect days of my entire life. We played house in my little cottage upstate. I made you pancakes and braided your hair and read you stories. You called me Mama Paula and told me you loved me. The memories came flooding back with horrible clarity. The woman with gentle hands who'd bathed her and dressed her in pretty clothes. The games that had felt wrong somehow. The insistence that she call this stranger Mama. The growing fear as days passed and the woman's smiles became more desperate. Her hugs too tight. Her voice too bright. You were scared, Natalie said, the truth hitting her like a physical blow. You were terrified of being caught, and you took it out on me. I was not scared, Brenda snapped, her mood shifting again. I was heartbroken. I knew it couldn't last, that eventually I'd have to give you up because the world wouldn't understand our love. It wasn't love. It was kidnapping. Brenda slapped her across the face, the sound echoing through the empty warehouse. Don't you dare diminish what we had. Those 3 days were real, Natalie. The love I felt for you. The joy of finally having a family. The way you trusted me completely. That was all real. Natalie tasted blood where her lip had split, but she forced herself to meet Brenda's eyes. If you loved me, why did you abandon me at that orphanage? Why did you let me spend 25 years thinking I was unwanted? Because I couldn't keep you safe, Brenda said, her voice breaking. I knew Robert would find us eventually, and when he did, he'd take you away from me. At least at St. Agnes, you'd have a chance at a real family, people who could give you the life you deserved. But that's not what happened, is it? I aged out of the system. I ended up on the streets, homeless and alone, because you gave them false information about who I was. Brenda's face crumpled. That wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to be adopted, to have parents who loved you. I left money. I made sure they knew you were special. You stole my identity, Natalie said, her voice rising. You erased Leah Ellington and created Natalie Cooper, a girl with no past and no family. You condemned me to 25 years of hell because you couldn't handle being rejected by my father. I saved you, Brenda screamed, spittle flying from her lips. I saved you from parents who would have used you as a weapon against each other, who would have destroyed your childhood with their selfishness and hate. I gave you a chance to be free from all of that. You gave me nothing but pain. Brenda's expression went completely blank, and for a moment, Natalie thought she might have gotten through to her. Then the older woman smiled, and the expression was so cold and empty that it made Natalie's blood freeze. Well, Brenda said conversationally, if that's how you really feel, then I suppose there's no point in keeping you alive, is there? She reached into her jacket and pulled out a gun, the metal gleaming dully in the filtered sunlight. Natalie's survival instincts kicked into overdrive, her mind calculating distances and angles while her body prepared to move. Your father should be getting my message about now, Brenda continued, checking the weapon with practiced efficiency. I told him where to find us, that if he wants to see his precious daughter alive, he needs to come alone. No police, no security team, just him. He won't come, Natalie lied, knowing with absolute certainty that Robert would walk into any trap to save her. Oh, he'll come, Brenda said with confidence. He spent 25 years looking for you. He won't let you slip away again, even if it kills him. She raised the gun, pointing it directly at Natalie's chest. And it will kill him. You know, watching you die will destroy him completely, just like losing you the first time destroyed him. It's only fitting. If I can't have the family I deserve, then neither can he. As Brenda's finger tightened on the trigger, Natalie closed her eyes and prepared to die, but instead of the gunshot she expected, she heard the distant sound of car engines approaching the warehouse. Robert had received the message, and he was coming to save her, which meant they were both about to walk into Brenda's final, deadly game. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the warehouse like gunshots. Brenda's head snapped toward the entrance, her grip tightening on the weapon as footsteps approached across the broken concrete. She'd positioned herself behind Natalie's chair, using her as a human shield. The gun pressed against her temple. Remember, Brenda whispered, her breath hot against Natalie's ear. One wrong move from anyone and you die first. I'd rather see you dead than in his arms. The main door creaked open, and Robert stepped into the dim light, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. Behind him, Natalie could see the shadows of police officers positioned just outside the entrance. But they weren't moving in. Not yet, not with a gun to her head. I'm here, Robert called out, his voice echoing in the vast space. Just like you asked. Let her go, Brenda. Oh, Robert, Brenda sighed, and for a moment her voice held the same gentle tone Natalie remembered from those 3 terrifying days 25 years ago. You look tired, darling. All this stress can't be good for your health. Robert took a careful step forward. His eyes locked on Natalie's face. She could see the fear there, the desperate love of a father who'd already lost his daughter once and couldn't bear to lose her again. But she could also see something else, a subtle hand signal he'd taught her during their security briefings, a message that help was coming. You have me now, Robert said, taking another measured step into the warehouse. This is what you wanted, isn't it? My attention, my focus. You have it. Let Natalie go. Brenda laughed, the sound high and brittle. Natalie, you still call her that, even though you know her real name, even though you know she's Leah, your precious little princess. She's not Leah anymore, Robert said quietly. Leah was a 4-year-old child who believed the world was safe and loving. You killed that child when you took her. Natalie is the woman who survived what you did to her. The words hit Brenda like physical blows, her face contorted with rage, and the gun trembled against Natalie's head. I didn't kill anyone. I saved her. I gave her 3 days of perfect love, perfect happiness. You gave her trauma that lasted 25 years, Robert countered, still moving slowly forward. You gave her nightmares and trust issues and scars that will never fully heal. Stop, Brenda commanded, swinging the gun toward Robert. Don't come any closer. But Robert didn't stop. If anything, he moved faster, closing the distance between them with the determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. You want to know what those 3 days were really like? He asked, his voice growing stronger with each step. I'll tell you what my daughter remembers. A woman who smelled like vanilla and spoke in baby talk while her eyes held something cold and frightening. A woman who forced her to play games that felt wrong, who insisted on being called Mama by a child who was crying for her real father. "That's not true," Brenda said, but her voice was wavering. A woman who bathed her and dressed her like a doll while she was drugged and confused. A woman who read her bedtime stories while she was terrified and alone, missing her family, not understanding why no one was coming to save her. Natalie could feel Brenda's grip on the gun loosening as Robert's words found their mark. The older woman was beginning to shake, the carefully constructed fantasy she'd built around those 3 days, crumbling under the weight of truth. She wasn't happy, Robert continued, now close enough that Natalie could see the tears streaming down his face. She was scared. She was a 4-year-old child who'd been taken from everything she knew and loved. And you were a stranger who was playing house with her terror. "No," Brenda whispered. "She loved me. She told me she loved me. She told you what she thought you wanted to hear because she was trying to survive," Robert said. "Just like she survived 25 years on the streets by learning to read people, to tell them what they needed to hear, to keep herself safe." The gun was shaking violently now in Brenda's hand. Natalie could feel the older woman's emotional disintegration, the carefully maintained illusion finally shattering completely. "You ruined everything," Brenda sobbed. "You ruined our perfect family, our perfect love story. All you had to do was see me, to love me back, and we could have been happy. I couldn't love you," Robert said gently, "because what you felt wasn't love. It was obsession. It was possession. Love doesn't destroy the thing it claims to cherish." That's when Natalie made her move. Years of street fighting had taught her to recognize the moment when an opponent was most vulnerable, and Brenda's emotional breakdown had created the opening she needed. She threw herself sideways, chair and all, breaking Brenda's grip and sending them both crashing to the concrete floor. The gun went off, the shot echoing deafeningly through the warehouse. Natalie rolled away from Brenda, still tied to the chair, as police officers swarmed through the entrance. But Brenda wasn't finished. With inhuman speed born of desperation, she scrambled for the fallen weapon. "If I can't have you," she screamed at Robert, "then no one can." She raised the gun, her finger tightening on the trigger, and Robert saw his own death reflected in her wild eyes. But instead of fear, he felt only a strange sense of peace. He'd found his daughter. He'd saved her. If this was the price, he was willing to pay it. The second gunshot was different from the first, sharper, more controlled. Brenda spun around, clutching her shoulder as blood seeped between her fingers. Detective Morrison stepped out from behind a support pillar, his service weapon still raised. "Drop it," he commanded. "It's over, Brenda." But Brenda wasn't listening. With her good arm, she swung the gun toward Natalie, who was struggling to free herself from the overturned chair. "If I can't have my family, nobody gets a happy ending." Robert moved without thinking, throwing himself between the gun and his daughter. Just as Brenda pulled the trigger, the bullet caught him in the chest, spinning him around and sending him crashing to the ground beside Natalie. The third shot came from Detective Morrison's weapon, and this time it found its mark. Brenda Whitaker crumpled to the warehouse floor. Her 25-year obsession finally ended. "Dad!" Natalie screamed, her voice breaking as she saw the blood spreading across Robert's shirt. "Dad, stay with me." Robert's eyes fluttered open, focusing on his daughter's face with effort. "Natalie," he whispered, and for the first time since they'd been reunited, her name sounded completely natural on his lips. "Don't talk," she said, tears streaming down her face as paramedics rushed into the warehouse. "Save your strength. You're going to be okay." Robert smiled weakly, his hand finding hers despite the zip ties that still bound her wrists. "I'm proud of you," he said. "So proud of the woman you became. Leah could never have survived what you survived. But Natalie is stronger than any of us ever imagined. Don't you dare die on me," Natalie said fiercely. "I just found you. I'm not losing you again." "You won't," Robert promised, though his voice was growing fainter. "You'll never lose me again, Princess. Never again." As the paramedics worked to stabilize him, as police officers secured the scene, and Detective Morrison read rights to a dying Brenda Whitaker, Natalie held her father's hand and refused to let go. 25 years of separation, of pain and loss and searching, had led to this moment. And as the ambulance raced through the streets of Queens toward the hospital, Natalie finally understood what it meant to have a family worth fighting for. The steady beep of the heart monitor had become the soundtrack of Natalie's world for the past week. She'd barely left Robert's bedside at Presbyterian Hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor's chair and surviving on cafeteria coffee, and the determination that had carried her through 11 years on the streets. Robert drifted in and out of consciousness, the bullet having done significant damage to his chest but miraculously missing his heart by inches. The doctors said he was lucky, another centimeter to the left, and Brenda's final shot would have killed him instantly. "Dad?" Natalie whispered, squeezing his hand as his eyes fluttered open. "How are you feeling?" Robert's voice was hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed the day before. "Like I got shot saving my daughter," he said with a weak smile. "Worth every second of pain." The word came so naturally now. Daughter. Not Leah. Not the lost child of his memories. But Natalie. The extraordinary woman who'd emerged from 25 years of hell with her spirit intact. She'd finally stopped trying to remember being 4-year-old Leah and started accepting who she'd become. "The doctors say you can go home tomorrow," Natalie said, adjusting his pillows. "I've been working with the staff to set up everything you'll need for recovery." "What about you?" Robert asked. "Are you coming home too?" The question hung between them, loaded with all the uncertainty they'd been avoiding during the crisis. Natalie had spent the past week at his bedside, but they hadn't talked about what came next, about whether she was ready to fully embrace the life he was offering her. "I want to," she said slowly, "but there's something I need to do first." Before Robert could ask what she meant, Detective Morrison appeared in the doorway, his face bearing the satisfied expression of a man who'd finally closed a case that had haunted him for months. "Thought you'd want to know," he said, settling into the spare chair. "Brenda died this morning. Never regained consciousness after the surgery." Natalie felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that the threat was finally over. Sadness for a woman who'd been so consumed by delusion that she'd destroyed multiple lives. And something that might have been forgiveness for the broken person who'd given her those 3 days of twisted love before abandoning her to 25 years of hardship. "Did she say anything?" Robert asked. Did she ever explain why she killed Catherine?" Morrison nodded grimly. "She confessed to everything in the ambulance, like she wanted to clear her conscience before she died. Your ex-wife was planning to disappear with Natalie, take her somewhere you'd never find her. Brenda found out and confronted her when Catherine laughed at her, called her pathetic. Well, Brenda snapped. So she killed 2 people to protect her fantasy," Natalie said quietly. 3, Morrison corrected. "We found evidence linking her to the death of a former employer in Connecticut, a widower who rejected her advances. She'd been killing people who threatened her delusions for years, always making it look like accidents. The revelation that Brenda had been a serial killer cast her obsession with their family in an even darker light, but it also provided a strange sort of closure, knowing that the woman who destroyed their lives was finally gone, unable to hurt anyone else. There's something else," Morrison continued. "We found this in Brenda's belongings." He pulled out a small jewelry box and opened it to reveal a pair of tiny diamond earrings. According to the inscription, they were a gift from you to Leah for her 4th birthday. Brenda kept them all these years. Robert's eyes filled with tears as he recognized the earrings he'd given his daughter just days before she disappeared. "She was wearing them the day Brenda took her," he whispered. Natalie took the box, studying the delicate jewelry that represented yet another piece of her stolen childhood. But instead of the anger she expected to feel, she found herself thinking about a broken woman who'd carried these earrings for 25 years, clinging to a moment of imagined happiness. "She really believed she loved me," Natalie said, more to herself than to the others. In her twisted way, she thought she was saving me. "That doesn't excuse what she did," Robert said firmly. "No, it doesn't. But understanding it helps me let go of the anger." Natalie closed the jewelry box and slipped it into her pocket. "I don't want to carry her poison around for the rest of my life." A week later, Robert was discharged from the hospital with strict orders to rest and avoid stress. Natalie had transformed the mansion into a recovery center, complete with physical therapy equipment and a home nurse. But her real focus was on the project she'd been developing while he healed, the Leah Ellington Foundation, she announced, spreading architectural plans across his desk. Mobile outreach units for the homeless, equipped with medical supplies, food, and most importantly, caseworkers trained to help people navigate the system. Robert studied the plans, his eyes widening as he realized the scope of what she was proposing. This would cost millions to implement. Good thing you have millions, Natalie said with a smile. I've been talking to city planners, social workers, other advocacy groups. We can make a real difference, Dad. We can prevent other people from falling through the cracks the way I did. Other people like you fell through those cracks because of what Brenda did, Robert pointed out. Most homeless people aren't victims of kidnapping. No, but they're all victims of a system that sees them as problems to be managed instead of people to be helped. Natalie's passion was evident in every word. I spent 11 years invisible on these streets. I know what works and what doesn't. What people actually need versus what makes donors feel good about themselves. Robert looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the lost child he'd been mourning for 25 years, but a remarkable woman with the wisdom and compassion that came from surviving the unthinkable. Leah Ellington might have grown up to be a socialite or a dilettante, using her privilege for shallow pursuits, but Natalie Cooper Ellington was going to change the world. When do we start? He asked 6 months later. Natalie stood on the same corner of Fifth Avenue where her life had changed forever. But this time, instead of sorting through garbage bins for recyclables, she was distributing care packages from a gleaming mobile unit bearing the Leah Ellington Foundation logo. Remember me? She asked a young woman who was huddled in a doorway, clearly new to the streets and still carrying the shell-shocked expression of someone whose life had recently fallen apart. The woman looked up, recognition dawning slowly. You're that lady who used to collect bottles around here, but you're all clean now. I got lucky, Natalie said, kneeling down to the woman's level. But luck shouldn't be the only way people escape homelessness. That's why we're here. She handed the woman a package containing food, clean clothes, hygiene supplies, and most importantly, a card with information about housing programs, job training, and mental health services. My name is Natalie Ellington, she said, and this is my real treasure, the chance to help people the way I wish someone had helped me. Robert approached from across the street, walking slowly but steadily as he recovered from his injuries. He'd traded his $1,000 suits for jeans and flannel shirts, finding that the people they served responded better to his casual appearance. How's business? He asked, surveying the line of people waiting for assistance. Booming, Natalie replied. We've helped 17 people find permanent housing this month, and 12 more are enrolled in job training programs. She looked up at the gleaming towers around them, at the wealthy people hurrying past without seeing the human beings in need right at their feet. Once, she'd been invisible to them too. Now she was making sure no one else would be. You know what the best part is? She asked Robert as they worked side by side. Every person we help is someone who won't disappear into the system the way I did. Someone who won't be forgotten or abandoned or treated like they don't matter. Robert watched his daughter distribute dignity along with supplies, saw the way she looked each person in the eye and spoke to them like human beings deserving of respect. She'd taken the worst experience of her life and transformed it into a mission of hope. I'm proud of you, he said, the words carrying the weight of 25 years of love and regret and determination. I'm proud of us, Natalie corrected, leaning against his shoulder as they watched their teamwork. We turned our tragedy into something beautiful. We made sure our story had a happy ending. And as the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the golden streets where a lost daughter had once been found, Natalie Ellington smiled and knew that some treasures were worth more than all the wealth in the world.